Okay, welcome back. Um, Hopefully, you were able to come up with some of the different factors that might influence water quality in a given city after reading about it a little bit in Bangkok. And if we look at sort of how the authors lay this out in terms of factors, looking at some of the specific ones, you can see there's a number of different things that could influence the water quality of a given area. And this probably isn't really an exhaustive list, but it shows, I think, is a good example of showing how different areas and different agencies and different institutions and factors can all come together to influence water quality, where there's some base level things like the hydrology and seasonal water changes of a given area. Obviously, that can have an influence how much rain and storm water is coming into an area. That's pretty obvious. Another one, waste treatment. That seems pretty obvious too. Literally, how you implement your waste treatment facilities is going to have a direct impact on the water quality. And urban migration, sort of the demographics of where people are in relation to where the water is and where the water is being treated and things like that. Those all seem pretty obvious, and they're calling those intervening things. But there's also these other independent things that could influence all of these, and in turn influence the resulting water quality. So you could have floodplain changes or climatic changes in the seasonal, but also long-term changes in water flow. And that's going to influence your seasonal changes, and that's going to have a downstream, literally and metaphorically, downstream effect on the water quality. Likewise, government policies are going to be influencing that waste treatment from how much waste treatment is going on, how thorough is it, where is it taking place, is everyone have access to the same quality of waste treatment. Those policies are going to influence the waste treatment, which is going to in turn influence the water quality. And things like global investments and macroeconomics can influence where people are moving to, and that's going to influence water quality. So there's all sorts of things, and you didn't have to come up with something that was laid out here. There are other things that can influence water quality as well, and so I think that sort of shows why, if you want to understand what's going on in an urban ecosystem, there's lots of different things that you're going to have to study, and lots of different areas that you're going to have to use, and why this is fundamentally an interdisciplinary kind of science. And sort of along those lines, when you're doing interdisciplinary, specifically this type of interdisciplinary work, there's the same pro and con in the sense that you need a lot of data to understand what's going on. So that can be a con, but there's also lots of data available to use to ask some questions. So if we're dealing with urban systems, we've been tracking that stuff for a long time. There's lots and lots of census data. There's lots of public records that go back, and there's all sorts of economic data. There's tons of data. Now we have satellite imagery. There's all sorts of information that we can use to answer these questions. And so let's talk a little bit about those different types of data. I think when we're talking about urban forestry, one of the biggest most commonly used tools now is satellite imagery and remote sensing. So we can categorize the world into pixels, or separate the world into pixels and derive information about the land within that pixel based off of remotely sensed information. And I'm not going to get into remote sensing too much, but just sort of as an example here, about the different aspects of remote sensing is sort of one of the big ones is resolution. So the pixels would be, the size of the box. And here you're seeing not these boxes, these are parcels. The boxes, they're not really showing, but for remote sensing, you would separate all of this out into grid cells, and then each grid cell would have a variable or a characteristic to it. So we could say, how many grid cells are tree canopy. And so here, this is a high quality satellite image. This is from the I don't remember, National Agricultural Organization, something like that. And then this is from Landsat, I believe. And so you can kind of see the difference in the resolutions. Here it's really coarse, and here it's really fine scale resolution. Um, and the difference that makes if you're trying to quantify something like tree canopy, where you're really not getting a great picture. If you're using something like this, even though for a while this was all we had, and that's useful if that's all you have, there is kind of a high density of trees up here when you look at that compared to the other areas. So it gives you some information, but you're missing out on a lot. And so the resolution is sort of one of the main aspects when you're using remotely sensed data and separating things out into pixels. You should always keep that in mind. There's also plots, and so this is what a lot of traditional ecology has used, was just setting up plots. And so you could do the same sort of thing. You could like create grid cells here, and each one is a plot. You're going to do a plot in each one, and then you sort of randomly sample from that, and you draw a random sample, and then at each plot you can go in and sort of categorize the area based off of the size of the plot and things like that. And here they've sort of done that with the counties around Baltimore, and you can sort of see how they've categorized each of these plots, the underlying plots, using this sort of U4 sample plots. And I'm not going to go too much; it's not super important. But basically, the user or the researcher is sort of defining things in that sense, and you can have different size plots and different randomly sampled strategies for that. But what's probably even more common in urban settings is using parcels, which are sort of plots that just already exist because that's how the city is organized in this sort of way. And parcels are usually designating property boundaries. And so here you can kind of see the dynamic of how those, and there's lots of different ways, that municipal governments sort of come up with where is the boundary of a property, and what's the shape and all that. And there's a lot that goes into it, but I think for our purposes, it's sort of just useful to understand how we can use these as ways to quantify what's going on in terms of a patch dynamic perspective, and categorizing each parcel. And in that sense, you get to a mosaic, and you say, okay, what's this parcel, and what's this parcel over here, and what's this parcel, what's this group of parcels. That's probably a more common and intuitive way to think about things. But all three of these are used. And one thing that's useful to mention about parcels is that while it's those are boundaries that already exist, and we don't have to make them up. They are actually made up, and they change over time. And so they reflect, they might reflect property boundaries, they might reflect transportation routes and stuff, but that stuff isn't static. We're constantly developing the urban area, the urban environment. And so here you're sort of seeing the progression. Let's see if I think, yeah, the first is 2005, and then this one's in 1915. And then if you overlay them on top of each other, you can kind of see how different things are, where, yeah, there's actually still a lot of housing here, but in this area, there's new roads. There's not even this existing, whatever this was, is not even there. None of these are even there anymore. So things change quite a bit over time, especially over a century or more. So that's something to keep in mind with parcels as well. Okay, there's a short reading. This is it's like a page that sort of talks a little bit more about these different data types and how those are utilized. Then there's another reading that's more urban ecology and sort of incorporating the spatial heterogeneity idea into urban ecology and urban evolution. And so, as always, keep working your way through the module and have a look at these two readings, and I will see you next time.